All right. Well, I'm here with Caitlin, and we're going to talk about hydrogen. At least I am. But before that, she's got TV studios. Go ahead.
Yes, so TV studios are looking to hire people with AI skills during the workers' strike, which is
Work for our
problem.
students. Everyone should hire more AI people.
Yes, well, I mean, these salaries are outrageous. I was actually reading another article on Silicon Valley salaries, and I mean, they make a lot of money. I feel very lucky after reading what the averages are, but a lot of people in Silicon Valley are making a good amount of money. But you can make a ton of money if you just throw away your morals and obligations to society, become essentially a scab, and work for the film industry during during the pandemic, creating AIs to replace the writers that are currently on strike because they are afraid AI will take their jobs.
Well, they claim the current generation of AI experts are not going to be doing that directly, but in the long run, you could look at it that way.
Okay, well, let's look at the article specifically here. So this is on uh, NBC News. There we go. Nice window size there. Okay, so this is on NBC News, and the title of the article is "Film and TV Studios Post AI Jobs with Salaries Up to $1 million as Workers Strike." So these are found on 26 AI roles from various TV studios, and this was written by David Ingram. And essentially the main entertainment companies like Netflix, NBC, Sony. So NBC, the people that do this news, they're putting up they're looking for workers to come in during the strike to essentially create AI replacements for the striking people, which is basically a scab, as we call them. So I would, as much as the money is tempting, you have to sort of question what's going on here, why the companies are wanting to invest this much money during a strike for AI generation. Then what happens to the people that create the AI once it's up and running, which I imagine they'll fire them just like they'll fire the writers. This is the studio's MO at this point, right? If they can get rid of you, they will.
Well, as usual, I'm here to provide the fascist perspective. I mean, the everybody is ramping up AI right now for its many valuable purposes, but I kind of think what the studio people are worried about is overblown here, that you're actually going to use AI to replace the people with synthesized things. We'll see. We've already had computer graphics for a long time, and it sort of goes in waves. I'm skeptical that this would actually lead to less employment of real people in the long run. There'd be a period of transition. And also, I mean, from when I listen to Scott Galloway, what he says is that this whole writer's strike and actor strike makes no sense at all because the current economic conditions are that the film studios have a backlog of content that they can use, and they would like to cut costs by just not producing any more for a while, so they don't have any actual leverage in this strike. So I don't know. I don't think it's as simple as supporting them so they will win and end up getting more money. I think their demands are impossible and can't be met, and they're just going to get broken.
Well, one of the big problems is not that the AI is going to generate the final product,
Yeah.
but that it can produce the original script that will then take away royalties and rights from actual authors, and then they send that through a process to get revised and set up. So it
Well,
essentially takes
I don't think that's going to happen that much either, because the quality of the AI is not very good, and everybody is finding it has to be a supplement to your writing. It can't replace a human. But
That's
I
true.
think the script writers will, of course, use AI to help them write better scripts, just like coders will use AI to help them write better code. And I'm not sure there's anything wrong with that.
There's not. There's
Yeah.
not. What we're looking at here is not the good or bad of AI. I think AI is here to stay, and if you're either going to embrace it,
Yeah.
or you're going to fall behind.
Yeah.
Now, the issue though is that these companies are positioning themselves to leverage AI to stomp down on the workers, essentially. Like this is a power play. That's the issue here.
Well, but that's how capitalism works. Every company tries to produce their product as cheaply as possible to get the most profit. And the end result is it creates a thriving economy where lots of goods are for sale for cheap. And everybody has to accept that as technology changes, their role will have to change.
The problem is that that true capitalist ideal does not work in reality. You generally end up with monopolies and wealth rising to like the top 1% or even top 1% of the 1%.
Well, yes.
Actually, let me put on my Bernie Sanders hat here. It goes to the 1% of the 1%.
Well, it does. And we absolutely do need a progressive tax structure to help compensate. Currently, the inequality is way out of hand here.
Yeah.
You've got characters like Elon Musk that are just far too rich for anybody's good, including his good.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense for
Yeah.
you have such a huge disparity of so much. I remember, so I heard on a podcast the other day that before the pandemic, Elon Musk only had 20 billion, and the years of the pandemic are rocketing up to like 250 billion, and that's just crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, we certainly need some redistribution to compensate for the inequity we're getting in the current system. But I think these writers are flogging a dead horse. I think they're trying to get things they can't get. Anyway, so I was interested to find a couple articles about hydrogen, which are contradictory and interesting. First, there's oilprice.com, an energy news source, saying that there's a new tech breakthrough to make it much easier to generate hydrogen. Apparently, the current way you generate hydrogen is by doing electrolysis and burning methane to make the energy. So it's not even green and it's pretty bad, but they have a new technique using aluminum as a sort of catalyst that supposedly is much better at creating hydrogen and heat, and much greener, much more efficient, much cheaper. So they say this makes it possible that we'll have tons more hydrogen to use. And a lot of people say we should all have hydrogen in our cars and everything. And then Cal Matters, a very good sort of investigative news source, is saying hydrogen is a terrible idea and we shouldn't use it. And they have a pretty good argument too, which is that the current plan is to implement hydrogen by adding it to the methane in our natural gas, the way you add ethanol to gasoline. Now, ethanol is complete garbage. It doesn't save the planet at all. It's just a giveaway to the people growing corn, who is used to make the ethanol, which would be better used to make food. It's complete boondoggle. Just like before it, there was some other stuff, MEDTA or something they added to gasoline, which turned out to just make it worse and make it more horrible. And makes it, they say putting hydrogen in the methane will not in fact do any good, and it will be very dangerous because it's very hard to keep it in the pipelines. It tends to leak and then explode much more than other forms of natural gas. So anyway, it's very interesting to see this. There are a lot of people want to move to a hydrogen economy, but there are considerations where this might not be a good idea, and we'll see where it goes. But I think both these articles have good points from a different point of view. And anyway, it's worth knowing as it comes along. But anyway, Caitlin's got junk.
More space junk. Space junk is becoming a bigger issue in space day by day. And unfortunately, there's just not enough being done about it. And it's starting to look like it's almost going to be too late. So what I'm talking about is there's this article here on the Register by Laura Doberstein. Thank you, Laura Doberstein. And essentially, the European Space Agency is launching its mission to clean up space called Clear Space One. And its target was an old booster put up in like 2013 called V Vega Secondary Payload Adapter, VESPA. There we go. That's what it was left up there. Anyway, so it was going to take it down. Well, it turns out while they're waiting to launch the probe to go up and take down the space junk got hit by more space junk, creating more space junk. Now, luckily, the spacecraft does appear to be largely intact still. It's just like being hit by a bullet. It just made holes and a few shrapnel, but it's still large enough that they can still take it down. But this really highlights the importance of us starting to take trash down from space, because even if you leave something up there, it doesn't become one piece of trash. It becomes multiple pieces of trash, just like this just did. And we got to start taking stuff down that we're not using anymore.
How are they taking it down?
That is a good question. As far as I know, they're going to be sending up essentially a grappler to catch it and pull it down into the atmosphere again. So
And the
this,
previous missions I heard about like that would cost like $100 million to take down one piece of junk. And therefore, that seems like that can't possibly, they need something that will scale up. You need something like a net to catch a bunch of them all at once or something.
yeah, I don't, well, the problem is you can't do that because, so here's a video, oops, here's
Yeah.
a video running of it. Oops. Yeah, it has tentacles. They call it robotic tentacles to capture the target.
Mhm.
Now the problem with a big net is that you can't just like throw out a big net and like catch stuff in space because the stuff is moving faster than bullets, right? Many times
Yeah.
faster than bullets. So setting out a big net and just catching stuff as it flies by is not very practical. Plus, the spaces between orbits, you're talking about a three-dimensional space. So even if you're on like sort of the right trajectory, it can be above or below you, right? So that can also lead to problems. So what you have to do is first you have to get your garbage collector in orbit, and then you have to put it slightly inside the orbit of what you're trying to catch. So make sure it has the same incline, very similar orbital parameters. And as it approaches, because shorter orbits orbit faster than orbits that are further out. So as it approaches, you boost out so that it'll create an intercept. And it'll slowly intercept, and you right before it hits, you encircle the orbit. So now the orbits are the same. And at this point, they're roughly the same velocity. You can grab it and
Yeah.
then pull it down. You
That's,
cannot,
that's going to
yeah,
require a whole space mission for each one.
exactly. And there's no way around it. You cannot just
Yeah.
send up a net because, like I said, if let's say you have an orbit going around like this way, and then you have your big net coming down this way, this just rips through the net, right? And just creates more space junk. The
Just
space,
seems
yeah,
seems hopeless. I wonder if there was some way to do it with some kind of projectile, like squirt some kind of goo up there that would
no.
would slow them down without just making more junk. It just seems like bringing them out one by one with the space mission is impossibly expensive. That's never going to be the answer.
Well, the real answer is creating space missions, designing space missions specifically with end of life in mind and
Right.
reducing space junk. You just have to start. You just have to start with responsibility and end with responsibility.
Yeah, you just
Now,
have to stop adding more junk and live with the existing junk, I guess.
right. And the problem with shooting it down with lasers or projectiles is that you have the same problems.
Yeah.
You hit it, and now you don't have one space junk. You have thousands of pieces of space junk now in orbit.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an intractable problem, I think.
It's a difficult problem, but one that we do need to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And so I got more about the ARM IPO, a nice article about it on eetimes.com by Alan Patterson. It explains in more detail what's going on with ARM. And in particular, what's going on, ARM is apparently owned by SoftBank. And SoftBank is in terrible financial condition because they invested in a lot of really bad things like WeWork, and they made a really bad deal to expand ARM into China. They created a China branch and sold it off for essentially nothing. So not making the profit from China that they should be making. And so they're desperately trying to revive the fortunes of SoftBank by putting a really high valuation on the ARM stock offering, expecting it to be worth far more than it's going to be. And everyone expects that after they have their initial public offering and they have some capital, they will immediately cut research and development and spend all this capital trying to recover their bad financial condition. So a lot of people think that the ARM is not going to be financially viable, and it's not going to development is not going to continue. So they are talking about RISC-V being used as the alternative. Many people are foreseeing that ARM is not going to remain viable much longer, even after the investments from Apple and Samsung and other companies just invested in it, because all of them are, of course, on board with using ARM chips. The business problems are so large that ARM may sort of collapse instead of continuing to lead. So I'm very interested to watch this. And when we taught a DEF CON workshop, I was glad to have both ARM exploits and RISC-V exploits. We got RISC-V emulators, and we can all start learning to use them. So that may be the future. I mean, I thought ARM was the future because it was saving so much power, and with Apple putting out the M1, and it seemed like everybody, and Microsoft even jumping on board with ARM, it seemed like everybody was going for it. But the business problems may be so large, we may end up with RISC-V instead, which, as far as I can tell, is essentially the same as far as technological effect.
I've been saying the same thing for a while. RISC-V is the future. People don't see it yet. It's going to happen, just like Linux. Linux on the desktop is going to be the future.
Well, like a fascist, I often think the for-profit capitalism might make the best product, but in this case, the for-profit capitalism seems to have run into those obstacles you mentioned, like idiot monopolists throwing away the money to where, in fact, it's worse than the open source alternative. So we may end up with the open source.
I mean, RISC-V is being developed and supported by many for-profit companies, especially Intel. RISC-V is one of Intel's big child projects.
So we'd end up back with Intel. That's sort of ironic.
Yes. We go back to Intel, but the processor itself is open spec, which is better for everyone. And having open standards is better for everyone. Well, I would love to move over to RISC-V.
Yeah.
The problem is that, so the first, I'll talk about this for a little bit. The first like decent, I think RISC-V computer just came out.
That's what I wondered. Can you actually buy a RISC-V computer?
You can. So if you go onto Amazon, it's the Lychee I 4A. No, RISC. There it is. Okay. 64-bit, 16-bit. Yeah, so this is it. So this is the new hotness for RISC-V right now. Yes, you can see I previously viewed these. It's very interested because I love RISC-V. And I was thinking maybe I should get one of these eventually. Now this is essentially a Raspberry Pi type single board computer. That's all you can get with RISC-V at the moment. This has decent amount of RAM, like 16 gigs of RAM. Sometimes some editions, some have 8 gigs. These are pretty decent single board computers. Now the problem is that it comes with Debian pre-installed, and it actually works. Like a lot of times you buy these RISC-V boards and it's like, God damn it, like, nothing works. Nothing is designed with RISC-V in mind yet. And these boards, of course, are very niche. But this one is interesting because it actually apparently really works. Like you can get it up and running in no time. It's fantastic for RISC-V. Yeah. It also runs over Power over Ethernet. There's a Power over Ethernet jack up at the top. And then there's a few other really
What was that about the power?
Power over Ethernet. So you can run it as
okay.
Yeah, so this is perfect if you need like a little IoT device. And really that's all RISC-V is good for microcontrollers and IoT devices at the moment, because no one's making desktop processors for these. But this is how the ecosystem gets started, right? You start with these small things and you build up. Mm-hmm. Now, this can't even run YouTube properly yet.
Right.
I mean, like, and this is,
there won't be any market for it unless ARM fails.
No, there is a market for this, and there's definitely a market for it, especially in the AI space. There's definitely a market for this in the microcontroller space, for sure. Right. Microcontrollers in particular need to keep things as cheap as possible and as efficient as possible. And right. RISC-V is perfect for that. You can make them but
that's the issue. If the licensing ARM fee was high enough, then RISC-V would become economically preferable.
Right.
Yeah.
So we are seeing it move up. You can buy RISC-V computers at your peril. They're not too expensive, $210 for the top model, which I'm still eyeing. I might get it. But my experience with RISC-V computers so far have just been headaches. But they are just, I love having an open CPU standard.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to watch. And I know the same thing's happening with AI. There's the closed source model and the open source model competing. And again, it looks like the open source models are going to win.
Right. I mean, but this is how it always is. When you have closed source software, which is usually just a few years or even decades, a decade ahead of the open source software, but the open source software does it right. It's what the software should have been a decade ago. So you have to deal with correct software versus, bleeding edge features. And that's really the difference between open source and closed source for-profit software.
All right. Well, let's go back to you. You got this crazy elementary school.
Yeah. So if things in Florida couldn't have gotten any worse, it just keeps
Always Florida.
Always Florida. Yeah. Poor Florida right now. An elementary school in Florida. This is on Fox 35, Orlando, by Chris Lindsay. And a public school in Florida decided to pull out all the Black students in the school, put them into a room and scolded them for low test scores, which is like,
oh my God.
Yeah,
This is such terrible pedagogy in so many ways. I've been in high school and they take you to the gym to yell at you. This doesn't improve anything. It doesn't make anybody do better.
It doesn't. Yelling at students who are not performing well. When I was teaching, one of my core tenets was students don't fail. I fail the students. Right. And most teachers don't keep that attitude, right? Like that's a very unique on me, right? Because I don't think any student is really capable of failing. I'm just not meeting their needs. And a lot of times, that needs isn't they need more homework. It is they need like emotional support. They're having a tough time at home, and this is their safe space. And I need to, there's a whole lot. Anyway, enough about my pedagogy. Let's talk about their bad pedagogy and their racist pedagogy. So they took a bunch of the Black students, put them in a room, and scolded them for not performing well enough. And I think put like a few like non-Black students maybe up in the front, and were like, "You should be more like these people." It's
oh
like,
my
Jesus
God.
Christ.
That's like something from the 50s.
Yeah, no, this is Florida. Unfortunately, this is what happens when you have things going on in Florida where you have these like fascist policies. Bigotry is in fashion at the moment in Florida, and you end up hurting children a lot with this stuff. I mean, it's not okay.
Well, about 10 years ago, City College did something similar. There's a huge racial disparity in education. Like the Black students are a whole standard deviation below the white students. And the City College issued an edict. We are going to address this and fix the gap within a few years by doing nothing and allocating no resources to it. And of course, nothing happened except a few meetings. But it got one of my students interested, and he pointed me to a lot of articles from, I think, Alabama. I think it's the University of Alabama had the same issue, and they really decided to fix it. And they really did set up a whole system that did fix it. They set up special fraternities for the Black students who are new, the first member of their family to ever go to college to go to, where they teach you. They had study groups, they had mentoring, they had a lot of help. And the end result is the Black students did well, got degrees, got jobs. That's what you can fix the problem, but you have to actually have sensible, productive ways to fix it.
Right. And it really needs to be spearheaded by the people most affected by it. So like you mentioned, like study groups and like peer support.
Yeah.
And that's a big component as well. And like I said, a lot of the times the reason why students aren't doing well is not because they're not smart enough, but because there's either background issues, like, poverty, institutional racism, for example, or, some sort of emotional thing going on. They could be, going through.
Also, I think a lot of them come from families where no one has been to college before, and they don't understand that you have to set aside time in a quiet place to study, and you have to expect them to put a lot of work into their school, and they don't have the support and the structure that they need. You have to add that.
Right, exactly. And exactly. There's also practical supports as well that you need to take into account. So anyway, but you just don't do this. You don't isolate the Black kids and be like, you're not doing good, it's your fault, you need to improve.
Tell them you should be white. Like, this is not going to help anybody.
Yeah, this is not going to help anyone. And like I said, in my point of view, the Black students aren't failing. The schools are failing the Black students, and
Yeah.
we see this in this article. So
Yeah, that's a very fair statement, I think. And, I remember it was for reading this that I began to appreciate how much I'm the child of privilege. My parents were educated, my grandparents were educated, and I didn't realize how they made it easy for me to succeed in school. I just thought this was normal. We'd read a lot and have all these intellectual discussions, and you'd spend your time at home and they'd expect you to be doing your homework and working on stuff. Not everybody has that kind of structure that makes it easy. Yeah. All right. Anyway, the last one I thought was pretty amazing. This is I've heard this in like CISSP training. They say, be careful that your pen test reports don't leak out because that stuff is confidential. And I'm like, well, sure, but who would do that? Well, Belcan did that. A defense contractor trusted by a lot of the three-letter agencies, apparently, they put their pen test reports on a public Elasticsearch server and left it open. So people found all their reports of their vulnerabilities, including the ones they didn't fix, and including their like administrator emails and usernames and passwords, which were hashed, but still even exposed. So it's a pretty big black eye for them. And they said that especially now after SolarWinds, everyone's worried about the supply chain. And this is just the kind of thing that corrupts your supply chain when you leak your internal pen test report so people know how to intrude on your software development process. So that's an example of this, of what I thought was generally a theoretical risk in the past actually being manifested. So anyway, that's it for this one.
oh, it
Unless
is
you got
not.
more.
Well, I can talk about the background.
You should. You
Today's
should.
background, yes.
The astronomy is always a hit.
Yeah, so you can kind of see Nebula. So a bit about this picture. This was actually a failed attempt last night. I ran into technical issues. I managed to take a few shots, not enough to make a really clear image, but enough that, I was able to see something. And then the clouds rolled in. So I basically spent 4 hours last night trying to get images and only got like 5. So, but
the pink and green sort of cloud looking stuff at the top should be a nebula, right?
it is Nebula. So yeah, so this is Nebula. So I'll show you where it is. So what I did is I pointed my telescope towards the North American Nebula, which is here in the Milky Way band, in near the sort of head of the Cygnus constellation, near Deneb. And as you can see, it looks a little like North America if you kind of squint your eyes a little bit. And the region that this photograph is taken from is right in here. So if you look in sort of this area, you see how there's like nothing below. And if I were to flip this image around, it would become, oh, there we go, comes this.
Okay, so it's a close-up of a little detail of the North American Nebula.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. Well, good. And as you said, the clouds rolled in, and we were talking about before the podcast. So your magic device can get rid of background light, but it can't punch through the clouds yet.
It cannot. I mean, you also, if you put a lens cap on it, it can't punch through that.
Oh, so you got improvements you got to work on.
Yes. So the telescope works by boosting the signal to noise ratio, essentially turning time into more signal, because the images in space don't change. So if you just keep collecting light and keep collecting light, you can sort of suss out what's the noise and what's actually in space.
But I would think like the street lights don't change either.
They don't so much. So the thing is, I'm not really okay. I'll show how this works. So if I'll share my desktop 1 second here. Let's see, share desktop. Okay, here we go. So if I were to open one of the files that comes out of the camera, just raw. So I don't actually get images out straight from these industrial cameras. I get scientific images, raw scientific images that are in FITS format. So, nope. So like last night, so yes, I just got a few images. Most of these got thrown away, but if I open one up, you'll see that there's nothing there. Absolutely nothing is there. Now, the reason why that is because it has this huge well to collect light into. So these are essentially 16-bit images. Now, if I were to then open this up in GIMP, actually what I'll do is I'll open up another a TIFF in it, because GIMP does not like the fetch file. So I'll open one up that's already been converted into a TIFF. Okay, here we go. Oops. With GIMP. So, okay, so here we have the image, the raw image that I took from the telescope in GIMP. And there's nothing there. There's a few stars, but it's empty. Now, the reason why this is because this is taking a whole lot of data, including, bright objects, dim objects. We have to get the dim objects to come out, and we can do that. We go into levels, and you see there's this giant peak here. Well, that's where all the important data is. So if we move our blacks all the way to the start of that peak, and then we move this all the way over here. Now here we can sort of see where the light pollution is, but we're gonna go past that, We're gonna look at this region right here. And all of a sudden we can start seeing that faint nebulous cloud show up in the image. And with further, adjustments, adjusting the layers like this, you can essentially get the final product, which is what was behind me, and I'll pull that back up again, which is this.
So how exactly did the background light get removed? Something about that threshold you pulled down?
Right. So I'm able to pick out a small portion of the light that comes into the image.
Right. You only allow certain intensity ranges.
Exactly, certain intensity ranges. And I do this over and over again, and I stack the images, and then I'm able to then zoom in on the intensity range that I'm very interested in, and ignore and just basically cut off the rest. And when I do that, I can have images come out, even though, like I showed you, the image that originally comes out of the camera is this dark nothingness, a few stars, but there's so much data there. And with enough exposure time, taking multiple images, stacking the images, and then drilling down directly into the part of the intensity that has the part of the image that I want, I'm able to grab the details out.
So a steady wash of light, like for streetlights, is really just a matter of the black level.
Exactly.
Oh, okay. That's good.
Not only black level, if they're brighter, then it's also the sort of peak top white level too.
All right.
So yeah.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of other stuff you can do in post-processing to make things jump out. Increasing contrast, saturation, and you can do advanced stuff like wavelet decomposition of the image, and play around with that. So there's a whole bunch of sort of post-processing you can do once you have the raw data to have things show up. So I know flat earthers have said, pointed to this famous quote by someone at NASA saying that all images from space have to go through Photoshop. And this is why, because the raw images you get from astronomy equipment, including space telescopes, is completely unusable. You have to essentially throw it into a darkroom, a digital darkroom, and and get the data you want out of it. So,
all right. And you have to erase all the aliens and stuff.
Yeah, erase all the aliens, but Photoshop in this case really is a Photoshop darkroom type thing where you're just developing the digital image.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, then I think that's it for this one, and we'll have another one on Tuesday.
All right, sounds good.